Trust is currency, and the United States has declared itself bankrupt in a move that will reverberate across Europe and beyond. The White House has taken the astonishingly reckless decision to sever critical intelligence sharing with Ukraine. And I think it's an act of political spite with profound military consequences, and it's difficult to see this as anything other than a petulant power play by Donald Trump, the man with the wig, who's placed his personal frustrations ahead of global security and the commitment that America has made in various documents like the Budapest Memorandum and so on. How can anyone trust the United States after this mess? Let's be clear about what it means. The United States has provided intelligence to Ukraine that has been vital to resisting the aggression of an invading neighbour, Russian aggression. From identifying targets for high-precision strikes to warning Kyiv about incoming missile attacks. This intelligence has shaped Ukraine's ability to defend its cities, disrupt Russian supply chains, mitigate casualties, and the abrupt withdrawal of this support leaves Ukraine vulnerable, effectively handing Putin an advantage on the battlefield. The justification, according to the National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, the US is reviewing all aspects of its relationship with Ukraine. The reality, this is a crude act of diplomatic coercion designed to force Zelensky, who is into negotiations that will be dictated by Trump's terms. The intelligence freeze, paired with the earlier suspension of military aid, is a strong-arm tactic intended to squeeze Ukraine into compliance. The message from Washington is clear. Agree to Trump's demands or be left to fend for yourself. Well, that would be okay if there weren't documents on the table that America had signed. It doesn't matter who the president is bound by those documents. The consequence of this reckless policy extends far beyond Ukraine. European leaders are now scrambling to respond to what French President Emmanuel Macron has bluntly called a new era. Macron is already initiating crisis talks with discussions of extending France's nuclear deterrent to the continent, and Keir Starmer has warned that disengagement from Ukraine would be a catastrophic mistake. And these statements highlight a stark reality. Europe is preparing to take over responsibilities that the United States is abandoning, and while some may argue that Europe should always have taken greater ownership of its security, the circumstances under which this transaction is happening, mid-conflict, under duress, and in direct response to American unreliability, are deeply troubling. This isn't just about intelligence sharing. This is about the very fabric of alliances, about the commitments that nations make to one another in times of war and crisis. These commitments are made during peacetime. And the US has repeatedly reassured Ukraine of its steadfast support. And now, because some twit with a wig is in the White House, that stops. Because of a change in leadership, that stops. The promise is broken, and with it the credibility of the United States as a global leader. That's now severely undermined. If Ukraine, an ally on the front lines of democracy's struggle against authoritarianism, can be treated in this manner, who is next? It's not about Zelensky anymore. This is about the credibility of the United States. Consider the sheer absurdity of Trump's strategy. On the one hand, he's demanded that Zelensky come to the negotiating table, crawl to the negotiating table. On the other, he has stripped Zelensky, Ukraine, of the very means to negotiate from a position of strength. By removing intelligence and military assistance, Trump is effectively forcing Ukraine to surrender leverage, ensuring that any peace talks will be on Russian terms. That isn't diplomacy. That is capitulation dressed up as pragmatism. Ukraine is understandably engaging in a balancing act, expressing willingness to negotiate while simultaneously making it clear that any settlement must not reward Russian aggression. But with this latest White House decision, Kyiv's ability to resist Putin's demands has been fundamentally compromised. European leaders are now forced to consider alternatives. Do they attempt to replace US intelligence sharing, even if their own capabilities pale in comparison? Do they accelerate military assistance, knowing that the United States might block key supplies at any moment on the whim of Trump? Do they accept the United States has become an unreliable partner and chart a new course without it? The answer must be yes. It isn't just a question of what happens in Ukraine. The global order is built on the assumption that the United States, for all its inconsistencies, is broadly committed to stability. The global order is built on the assumption that what you agree to last year is what you do this year. That assumption is now in tatters. Allies around the world are watching this fiasco unfold, taking notes on Washington's erratic behaviour. If the US is willing to turn on Ukraine at such a crucial moment, why should Taiwan, Israel or NATO trust in American reassurances? Why should Putin trust in any American reassurances that are given at the negotiating table? The tragedy of this situation is that it was entirely avoidable. The Biden administration had established a precedent of strong, reliable intelligence sharing with Kyiv, a relationship that has now been upended overnight by an administration that sees politics as a game of personal leverage. Trump's approach is not one of strategic withdrawal, but of impulsive, short-sighted manoeuvring that has weakened both Ukraine and the West's position against Russian aggression. The US decision to block allies from passing on American intelligence to Ukraine only adds insult to injury. This means that even those nations willing to help are being prevented from doing so effectively. Washington has tied the hands of its own allies while leaving Ukraine exposed. What comes next? The Trump administration claims that the intelligence sharing pause will be lifted if Ukraine demonstrates its commitment to negotiations. This is a hollow assurance. Ukraine has always been open to negotiation, providing it isn't forced into submission. If Trump is waiting for Zelensky to wave a white flag, he may be waiting in vain. Meanwhile, Putin is no doubt delighted, watching Ukraine struggle while the Western alliance scrambles to adjust to this new reality, to this reality of deception and bullying. And the irony in all this is that Trump has often accused Europe of not doing enough. Now, in response to his erratic policies, Europe is being forced to step up, possibly even considering Macron's nuclear deterrence proposals. In a twisted way, Trump may be accelerating European military independence, but not in a manner that benefits US interests. The last time there was a pause, and not as big a pause or as compromising a pause as this, Ukraine suffered badly because the weapons which were promised weren't delivered. Why? Because the Republicans were delaying a vote. Instead of fostering stronger alliances, Washington's behaviour is pushing its closest partners away. For Ukraine, this is a moment of extreme vulnerability. For the United States, it's a moment of self-inflicted reputational damage. Trust, once lost, is hard to regain. The next time the United States asks an ally to make a sacrifice, to trust in its commitments, to stand by it in Iraq, in Afghanistan, or wherever, to stand side by side, who will believe them? Who will trust them? Who will join them? In the grand scheme of history, this may be remembered as the moment when American credibility crumbled. And for what? To pressure an ally into an unfavourable peace? To play political games at the expense of Ukrainian lives? This is not the behaviour of a superpower. This is the behaviour of a thug. It's the behaviour of a nation rapidly alienating itself from its own friends, from its own core of honesty and trust. And when the dust settles, when Ukraine looks back on this betrayal, when Europe recalibrates its security strategies, when other allies begin to hedge their bets, America will have no one to blame but itself.